Now, I consider myself quite fortunate that I was in a position to see the original Predator film in 1987 in the cinema. I say this because it's one of many classics from the 80s. And if you were to transpose yourself back to the 1980s in terms of entertainment, there are a lot of these action-packed, raw, you could say masculine films. A lot of them typified and embodied by the various characters, poorly played characters for the most part, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well known, obviously, he plays Dutch in Predator. But imagine living back then, almost 40 years ago, and comparing that to now, in 2024. You just don't see a lot of films like that. Every now and then you might see a John Wick or something along those lines, but you don't see that sort of raw, masculine, action-packed type of film that, all things considered, was pretty popular up until comparatively recently, if you think about it. And you have to ask the question, what happened? Well, the other day I was talking about this latest Joker film, which is a joke, no pun intended, a joke of the former one. And it's important to state that this does not just apply to films or television or the equivalent. And I've talked about this a lot. This applies a great deal, perhaps even more so, to games. But this is shot through the entertainment industry. What we've seen, what we've borne witness to, is an extreme feminization of entertainment. And you can just look at anything coming out. You'll see that various you-go girls, superpowered females playing roles that traditionally would have been played by males. And these films typically don't do very well. In the gaming world, you see this litany of superpowered, amazing women that can do pretty much everything, who also, coincidentally, almost never look good. This is a consistent observation you could make. And also the type of games that are made and how they're made. So the question is not so much that this exists. You have to be blind, in denial, or pushing these types of politics or this agenda to deny it, but rather, how did we get here and what's actually happening? Well, let's just first establish the fact that usually men and women are quite different, on average, right? There are exceptions, but on average, men and women are quite different. They're different in how they approach things, different in how they perceive the world, and above all, different in their interests. And this is something that's strangely controversial in today's day and age. No negatives attached to it, simply stating that men and women are different on average and tend and gravitate towards different things. That's controversial, and in some circles viewed as sexist. We'll set that aside. But this is a well-established fact, observationally, in science, etc., etc. It's just well known. Well, what happens then when you get a massive influx of women participating in the workforce, and specifically in various sectors that were formerly in the majority male or male-dominated? Well, shockingly, to some at least, but not so shockingly to me and other people, you get a change. You get a change in the direction, the trajectory, however you want to put it, of what's happening. Now, in the entertainment industry, this change is very obvious, because what we can observe is the people who are making decisions of who to employ and who to have in various roles, and the types of characters that are put in games and how they should look, part of this is informed by things like HR, human resources. Now, human resources, you'll ask anyone, even the women working in human resources, is dominated by women. And the interesting thing about this is human resource in and of itself, as far as I understand it, I'm not an expert, I've talked to people who are familiar with it, or even people who've worked in human resources. It's this weird thing, it's like an extra appendage to whatever it might be, because human resources is often separate in terms of their understanding what's going on from the thing that they're appended to. Let me give you a really simple hypothetical example of this. So you have a construction company, right? And then you have human resources, and the people in human resources, the women typically, often have very little knowledge about the business of construction. And the same applies to a lot of businesses and a lot of sectors. So the same applies, unfortunately, probably, I have no insider information here, but probably based on all the other data we have and information and observation, this probably applies to places like Hollywood. And it almost certainly applies to the gaming world, where I do have a little bit more of inside information because I've talked to people. A lot of these women in HR are making decisions that have nothing to do with making good games. So that's the first layer. Then you have this drive that's been ongoing now for the better part of a decade, but has really picked up on steam in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, and that is the mass onboarding of as many female employees as possible. The point that even sometimes male employees will be disadvantaged in favor of women. And of course, this is nothing new. You see it also in science. It's basically a form of affirmative action, but this is not academia. This isn't the government. We're talking about entertainment companies, gaming companies that are pushing this for the sake of cultural/political reasons. And once you get enough women in an office, or really anywhere, the overall atmosphere and trajectory of things changes. For example, I've read studies before that show if women are hiring other women, and the candidate women happen to be more attractive than the women who are potentially going to hire them, these candidate women will be dismissed, and less attractive women will be selected. So we have basically intrasex competition taking place. And what do you think the reason these days, as I've talked about before, is for really unattractive women in the gaming world, and to a lesser degree in Hollywood? Well, it's because, oddly enough, women actually view fictional women, pixels basically, as a form of competition. And so their directive is to make the characters less attractive. This almost never happens with the male characters, mind you, because, again, this is all about the so-called male gaze, and yes, there are people that take that term seriously. And yet another knock-on effect of having women in mass employment in the entertainment gaming industry is, as I've said, they care about different things. So there's a very good chance that if you had an IP or a franchise that was heavily focused on something, take Battlefield, infamously. You probably heard of Battlefield. It is a shooter game published by EA where a couple of years ago they had female soldiers on the fronts of World War II, as if that were realistic. It was just a really, really ideologically driven decision. And it's very likely that women had some input in making that decision there. Now, once you have enough women there, let's be honest, the male voices get drowned out. Men that would typically just focus on the work, making good games, making good productions in terms of films or series or whatever it might be. And then we have a further knock-on effect that I think a lot of you are familiar with, and that is this knock-on effect of simping. Basically, if you get enough women involved anywhere, what happens is the men typically will, to some degree, kowtow and simp. They will go along with the flow because they want that punani, at least theoretically. And even if they don't think they can get the punani, they will still bend the knee to the wishes and whims of the women working in said environment. And of course, occasionally you also have some ideological men that are really into the far-left politics and progressive politics of our time. But it's mostly women directing the stuff, with men going along with it because they think somehow it's in their best interest. If you've ever asked yourself these days why things are not as entertaining as they used to be, this is pretty much your answer. Now, for the longest time, I had a pretty equitable view of this. I thought, okay, say in games, you can have hot guys and hot women, and everyone gets their piece of the pie. But in recent years, after many encounters with people that I view as mentally ill, I've come to the conclusion that they don't want you to have your piece of the pie as a man. They don't want you to enjoy things as a man. They're actively against you enjoying things as a man. And as a man means, in this context, your preferences, the things that are tailored to your interest. And if that includes hot women in games or proper action films of the like of Predator from 1987, that's a problem. Some of this is born of resentment politics, but most of this is just born of a certain mentality and imperative. They just don't care, and therefore will take a dump on your interests in terms of entertainment, preferences, etc., because that's just what they do. Now, there's an important question that needs to be posed here. And for whatever reason, it's not a question we can pose in the current year. Yes, we need to acknowledge that men and women are different, and that if you have a flood of women in a certain sector, they're going to change things. They're going to change things internally in terms of the dynamics at the workplace, and more importantly, they're going to change the output, the results of the workplace. You see this in film, with many of the flops of Hollywood. You've seen this in places such as Netflix. Have any of you seen the adapted Witcher Netflix? It's terrible. And one of the producers actively admitted that she didn't want attractive women in the series. And Geralt really is a secondary role in that, if you've ever played The Witcher or read the books, secondary to the females. And of course, in the gaming industry, you see it again and again with the ugly female protagonists who are, I can do everything and look terrible at the same time types of characters. So originally, like I said, I thought, you can have your piece of the pie, and I can have my piece of the pie. But these people have shown again and again that that men are not allowed to have your piece of the pie. And what do you do about that? If you voice the slightest concern or complaint, they will scream misogyny, sexism. But it's simply a fact that women, given sufficient numbers, are going to change the overall tenor and atmosphere of any workplace, and more importantly, the end product of that workplace. And we see it in the things that we consume in the entertainment realm. And it is terrible for men. There isn't really a solution here other than, perhaps, greed. It just might be the case that across multiple platforms and entertainment industries that the more the films and series flop, the more the games flop, the more they are hyper-tailored to female interests and turn away from male interests, that they will not sell well. And eventually shareholders will say, what the hell is going on here, guys? You need to make games that actually sell. You need to make series and produce films that do well, that also appeal to men, and in some cases specifically appeal to men, such as The Predator did and many action films of the 1980s. I think that time is coming. I just think it's going to be slow going, and it's going to take a while. We're in for a bumpy ride, gentlemen, when it comes to this topic. But I do think there's some light at the end of the tunnel. We're talking, though, 10, 15, 20 years, unfortunately. There needs to be some kind of change, and I think that change is ultimately going to be motivated and pushed by greed. And the fact that mass involvement of women in entertainment has not really produced the results that people thought they would. But we're going to have to wait it out. In any event, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Without you, the channel could not persist, could not stay alive. Thank you so much. And if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, it'd be much appreciated. Please also hit the bell icon to be notified of my videos. A lot of people are not receiving notifications. Many people tell me about this, so please hit that bell icon. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.